I made a $1.3 million business mistake. And thankfully, it only cost me $68,000. So I'm sharing this story because it makes light, doesn't make light in levity, but it brings to light a big problem that I see many people make. So I'll share the story of how I made this mistake, how I recovered from it, but also tell you why it happened, which is the bigger point in all of this. So 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, I was still doing the webinars every week, but it was getting towards the end of COVID. So all the way through COVID, we'd done a webinar every single week, a LinkedIn Live every single week, and it had really got us through the pandemic. And we grew through the pandemic crazily. A lot of businesses struggled, but we didn't. We grew, and we grew crazy amounts. We went from bouncing along at 500,000 to coming out over 2. So this is what we were doing. We were doing a LinkedIn Live every single week. And we got to maybe 2022, early 2023. I can't remember the exact date now. And we made the decision that these webinars weren't really yielding as much as we'd want. And there were other areas that were actually making us better money. So is it worth doing? And internally, the data seemed to support it. So I decided we'd stop. So we stopped doing the webinars. So LinkedIn Lives every week. And one of the reasons was I was doing it on a Tuesday evening. So it was cutting into my evenings each week. I loved doing them. I enjoyed doing them. But it was like, is it something you just love doing, Dean? So we cut them. And about 6 months down the line, we had the most horrific performance as a business. Like 50,000 loss, then an $18,000 loss. And the month before we didn't make any money. And it's like, what has changed? And we immediately thought, maybe we've reached that point where social selling, LinkedIn, everybody knows it. Maybe our business is over. It was like, that's how sudden and kind of abrupt it felt. And we were like, we got to do something about this. So we did look at all the things of, naturally a lot of companies were spending money adapting to the pandemic. So maybe that wave's over. Maybe we need to trim headcount. So we did all of those things. But we also started to look at what have we been doing differently? What had changed between doing so well to losing money? And so we looked at where our leads were coming from. We looked at were we closing more or less? We started to put all of those things, tidy all those things up and look through. And one of the things that we discovered is how, and a lot of businesses have this, they don't truly look at where did that person's journey, where did that buyer's journey start? And we hadn't done this either. So we knew what was why they became a lead on that day from the sales call, but we didn't track how their journey started. We've since corrected this. So what we did is we looked at all of the data and we found actually a lot of people were converting from our email list. So we thought, well, let's double down on that. Let's double down on that. But then it was like, well, where did the emails come from? And we doubled down on that. But we had some missing bits of the puzzle because our CRM didn't track that. It tracked it as an email lead. So a lead from the email list. We didn't know where that email came from in the CRM. So the data was telling us email, email, email. So then we have to look at what was the source of the email. Was it lead magnets? Was it paid workshops? Was it LinkedIn events? Was it downloads? Was it inquiry forms? Where did all this sales come from? And I think you know where I'm going here. We redid the data. We had to re-import all of the data of the people who signed up for our webinars or LinkedIn Lives, watched the LinkedIn Lives. And we tracked it all back. And we discovered two things. Number one, 70% of all of our new business had come from people who had registered for our LinkedIn Lives. Registered. The second thing we noticed is that most of those people, 70% of them, had come to or registered for two. So not one, two. So immediately when we realized this, we put the LinkedIn Lives back up. We started doing them again and all of that stuff. And we had to do a whole load of crazy marketing activity to close that hole. And then we fired the webinars back up. And guess what? We've not had those kind of dips since. So why am I telling you this? Well, there's a really good film called Glengarry Glen Ross. It's a great film. I don't subscribe to the sales approach in there, but there's a great film and it's worth watching. And Alec Baldwin is, a pushy sales leader. It's like boiler room style sales, very old school, very aggressive. But he writes on the board, AIDA, which is a brilliant copywriting format, but he also writes ABC, always be closing. And what he's meaning there is whenever you're talking to a customer, always try and get a close. Always. Don't let it go away. And that's a bit pushy, a bit aggressive. But there's also a point of always be marketing. And this is my business motto. And it comes from not just the LinkedIn Live situation, but my first business experience. And my first business experience, I actually had to quit my business because I ran out of leads, ran out of clients, and then ran out of money. And that's usually the way it goes. You run out of leads, you run out of clients, then you run out of money. Running out of money is actually the sign that your lead gen problem and your sales problem is already broke. Running out of money, yes, you can solve it by trimming back, but actually if you are making money and then you've stopped making money, it is usually a lead and a sales problem. So for me, my first business failed that way. So I've always, one of my clients actually, they run a £10 million, so $13 million organization, way bigger than us. And I was chatting with him and he said, you market like a $10 million business. And I said, yeah. He said, why? You're probably over marketing. Probably right. And I said to him, the reason why we do it is actually probably my version of PTSD. Always remember that first situation where I ran out of money, ran out of leads, ran out of clients, ran out of money. So I always market more than I need. And I always market even if I don't need it, because you never know what's coming. You never know when you might need the leads. And interestingly, that paid off in the pandemic because we had so many leads coming through, more than we could ever need, that it actually kept us going way beyond that. But there is a real important point here of always be marketing. When you're busy, it's easy to think, you know what, I can shelve that. We're busy right now. I'll do it in a couple of weeks. I have found that roughly speaking, depends what marketing activity you're doing, but roughly speaking, any amount of marketing activity has a 30-day plus time lag before you see any benefit from it. 30 days. And that's probably a minimum. There are some things that you can do tactically, like even with outreach. If you're outreaching now, the best way to have get a high response rate is to have warmed that relationship at least a month before. Yeah, or 2 weeks before, depending on how big of a sale. But the more you market before you try and sell, the more they know you, the more they like you, the more they trust you. So it makes the conversion easier. So there's always this kind of lag before the effort pays off. And often that's some very tactical stuff, 2 weeks, but realistically 30 days plus. So whatever you do today on a marketing front, you should judge it by its return, like 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the line. Don't judge it by, has it done an immediate conversion? That's sales activity in my book. If you run a paid ad to sell something, you should see a return because it's a direct advertising, direct marketing kind of activity. But if you're building your brand on LinkedIn, that is a long-term win to actually help you convert better over the long term, not just immediate. So there are some things you do in marketing that unfortunately, painfully, will have a long-term effect that you cannot see or attribute. So it was my mistake for not tracking that webinar filter. And I could have, after the first webinar I did, go, oh, that didn't make enough money. So wait till you hear how much these webinars made. That couldn't make enough money. So obviously it's not worth doing. It's not worth doing. I could have done that on the first one. I could have done it on the second one. I could have done it on the third one. But I would have cut off what made me $1.3 million. That's how much it made me, $1.3 million, that activity. And we worked it out, and there's two parts to these LinkedIn Lives. There's what happens initially, in other words, the direct sales and leads you get from doing that LinkedIn Live. And that's not a lot. It's not a huge amount of money. For a solopreneur, a small business, doing one webinar, it might have a little return. You go, it's all right. It's better than cold outreach. The second one, if you look at the second one in isolation, you think, oh, well, that's all right. But what we discovered was that the entire value, if you look at how many customers and how much money it was, divided by the number of webinars we did, it was $27,000 per webinar. $27,000 per webinar. Nobody turns their nose up at that. And I turned it off because I couldn't attribute value that was, in my metric to go, well, that's worth me spending the time preparing, getting ready for it. How foolish would I have been if I hadn't diagnosed that? And this brings me to a big point in that always be marketing. There's a big chunk of your most profitable marketing that if you don't ask the right questions, you will never find out if it works. So for an example, me posting content on LinkedIn, the amount of time it takes for me to put it all together and the cost involved, you'd probably go, is it worth it? Well, for me, leads to effort, maybe not. I mean, I've got a team who are working with me as well. So there's 3 salaries there, plus me working on all my social media. So you go, ooh, that's a lot of money. How much did you make directly off the content? And you probably go, is it worth it? Is it worth it? If I bring in 200, 300,000 in because of inbound leads from my content, is it worth it when, I'm probably paying 150 grand out in salaries? Is it worth it? And you go, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. But how many opportunities have I had, speaking invites that have put me in front of more people, people referring people, people who've followed me and subsequently bought, but it's not come directly from a piece of content, or where the content has played a part in the sales process. So in other words, I've messaged somebody, they've seen me a few times in the feed, and so they agree to a call. You can't put a price on some of the things that happens with content. And I say this to people all the time, that don't necessarily judge posts by their impressions, but judge them by the impression they leave. The problem is that the impression they leave on people is hard to quantify unless you either make a judgment call of how much it plays, or you actually ask people questions to figure that out. So Just curious, what prompted you to book a call? How long have we been connected? Looking at those data points to go, this person has been connected with me for 6 months. I've been posting regularly. That must play a part in that. Now, will I ever know how big or significant my content's been to my business? No. I can only measure it off what comes from the content specifically. So if somebody reaches out and they don't tell me, I won't know. Same with the events. How many people have been to those LinkedIn Lives and it's influenced them, but they've come in from another source? I wasn't set up to track that. So I literally turned off and shut down, albeit temporarily, nearly $1.3 million of revenue because I wasn't tracking the right things. I was thinking very short term. I was judging each webinar on, did that get me a sale there and then? And is that sale to the effort employed worth it? Now, did I make a profit on every webinar? Did I know I was making a profit on every? Yes. But was it the profit I'd expect for my time and the number of sign-ups we would get? No. But when I look back and I look at actually how many of those people who've been to webinars have actually bought, it's insane. And how many of those people who bought came into our database because of the webinar? How many of them came into our world because of the webinar? 70% of them. 70%. It's crazy. Crazy the number. So if you're thinking about your marketing activity, before you decide to cull it, ask yourself, is this having a role that I just can't see yet? And there are some things that you will never see. You will never know the real value of a personal brand because, you will never be able to measure that properly. You'll never know the full value of your content. You'll never know the full value of your webinars or your website or any of the things you do because some things are stepping stones to something else. Somebody could see your post today, message you and say, I saw your post, can I buy? But what else happened in that journey? Was it the fact that actually they got a message from you a few years ago? There's all sorts of factors. Somebody could be seeing your content for 6 months and reach out because of one post. Does it mean that post was the best post? Well, might be, but it could also be the fact that they've seen 10 others. And that was just the tipping point. So this is the problem with marketing, that you have to accept, unfortunately, that there's a whole load of activity that doesn't seem to have an ROI, but because the tipping point is one particular thing. So it's very tough to get your head around. Businesses struggle with this all the time. But there is stuff that you have to do, awareness, building familiarity, building know, like, trust, that if you shut that down and get really tactical or transactional about the selling side, you actually make that selling bit harder. And then you think, oh, it's the economy, it's maybe our offer's bad. No, people didn't know, like, trust. The marketing piece that you want to do, the thing that creates the awareness, the interest is not being done. Everything's being focused on conversion, and that's like scraping the bottom of a barrel. And that's what we've done, basically, if you think about it. When we shut the lives down, basically we were scraping the barrel without filling it. So we were draining our pipeline of everything we could get. And then what we started to do is try and optimize how we drain it. How do we get more out of the same bucket? Yeah, what we weren't doing, the webinars, the lives, were actually filling that bucket, and we were nurturing it in the email list. So we were getting all of these people in through this, nurturing it in the email list, nurturing it there, and it was dropping out, and we were going, emails, double down on the emails, double down, optimize, get more of that, more of that, more. Maybe our emails aren't working anymore. What we've done, we drained the bucket because we'd not been replenishing it. And for me, the lives were the way to replenish it. And I shut it down because short-sightedly, it looked like on the face of it, it was only making a small amount of revenue for the effort. what if we deployed that effort into email, we'd get better results. And actually, to be fair, we probably did for a little while. And then we realized we drained the bucket. So that was my $1.3 million mistake. It only cost me about $80,000 in the end. Still very painful, still very brutal. Took us 6 months to work our way out of it. And that's why now I tell people always be marketing. Even sometimes if you can't see the ROI because you don't know what the upstream of that activity is actually really doing, and you could cut off the bit that's actually working. You just don't know it.